Hi everyone and welcome back to my Consultant Explorer channel. I'm Charlie and I'm here to help you explore the early career years of management consulting, help you to be successful at it and show you how to make the most of the opportunities that it can open up for you. I spent 8.5 years at Accenture building the most incredible launchpad for my own career, and now that I'm running my own businesses, I can choose what I work on whenever and wherever I want to in the world. And that is the kind of freedom that I can help you find in your journey, which starts just as mine did in management consulting. When you've worked in consulting for a while, there are certain consulting professional etiquettes that become second nature to you, and you honestly don't even think about it. It's very easy not to realize how much of this consulting professional etiquette you've learned over the years, because all your colleagues are doing it naturally too. But every so often, you'll work with someone who doesn't have consulting professional etiquette. It might be someone who doesn't work in consulting, or it might be a junior consultant that just hasn't picked it up yet. But either way, it will take you completely by surprise because these things are so fundamental to an effective and efficient workday that you can't see why anyone would ever not do them, especially as for the most part, they're pretty easy to do. So if you want to be a top tier junior consultant, then pay attention. In this video, rather than rattling through an endless list of pointers, I've organized the pointers into 4 logical categories. I'll start with the category of pointers that are the easiest to do, and then I'll move through progressively harder and harder categories. The first category is meeting etiquette. The second, respecting others. The third, EQ or emotional intelligence. And the fourth and last, ownership of ideas. So let's start with category 1, meeting etiquette. And let's be honest, you're going to be organizing and attending a lot of meetings. The point of meeting etiquette is to be efficient with everyone's time, and that includes when booking the meeting and when running it. One of the biggest time wasters I've seen is when people send an email to the person they want to meet with, just to then sit around and wait for that person to propose a time for the meeting. If you're a junior person trying to meet with a senior person, this does not work. The most efficient way of getting time in the diary is just to book it and then to adapt to proposed new times if necessary. And when you book it, make sure you check availability. You can see the calendars of all of your colleagues, at least in terms of where their free slots and busy slots are. And you can also often see the same for your clients if you've been given a client email address. So use the visibility you've been given. You've been given it for a reason. Never book a meeting over a busy slot in someone's diary. That's just careless. And also, always ensure that the time you're booking is within the working hours of your recipients, who might be in a different time zone to you. Next, always send a meeting invite populated with an agenda. Otherwise, when the recipient receives it, how are they to know whether they should prioritize their time to attend? Or how are they to know what they should bring or prepare in advance? I've received meeting invites before with zero information in them, convinced myself that I should attend rather than just ignoring it, and then been asked on the spot for information that takes a lot of time to prepare. Evidently, these meetings don't go to plan. So meetings without an agenda and clear purpose in advance are a waste of time for all attendees. Once you've planned and booked your meeting, make sure you show up on time. And if you'll be a bit late, then make sure that you let your attendees know. Never leave them hanging around without knowing why. It's normal for a previous meeting to overrun or to need the toilet in between meetings, so you can take 5 minutes, but just let them know. And when you arrive at your meeting, don't just dive straight into deep content. Spend at least a minute or so on pleasantries, or if you can, bring up something friendly or personal that you remember chatting openly about with your attendees before. Having at least a basic relationship with your attendees goes a long way towards productive joint work. Also, if you're in person for that meeting and you're going to be typing notes on your laptop, then make sure you let people know that that is what you're doing. Otherwise, it can seem very rude to your attendees that you're just multitasking that meeting with other seemingly more important work. And finally, in this section, if you've booked and planned a meeting and now you have a reason that it needs to be cancelled, then make sure you send a cancellation with enough notice and with a reason. Most email providers prompt you to provide a reason when you send a cancellation anyway. But if you send a cancellation at short notice and you neglect to provide a reason, then your attendees may be frustrated that they have declined or postponed other priorities that they could actually have attended to. Providing enough notice allows them to pick these priorities back up, and providing a reason allows them to understand what's happened and agree with you that the meeting should be cancelled. Okay, our next section is respecting others. This is about recognizing that the people you work with are human, as well as about the fact that clients respond better to you if you're essentially one of them. Respecting your clients and colleagues means only ever calling and texting them during work hours. It's great now that we're so rapidly connected to anyone and everyone with our mobiles, but it's important to respect that people have personal lives during weekday evenings and weekends that should be protected from work interruptions. It's okay to send emails late because people can decide not to look at their work emails during downtime. But it's also good practice to include a footnote in your email which says something to the effect of, I'm sending this at a time that suits me, but I don't expect you to read or respond outside of your working hours. Similarly, people have personal and family commitments that often take precedent over work. These commitments, like for example health appointments or childcare, have to happen at specific times, and work can fit around it. Be respectful of these commitments in the meetings you book and the expectations you communicate. Another form of respect is saying thank you. If someone helps you out in some way, whether it's someone senior giving you some guidance or someone junior sending over their work to you, it makes a huge difference if you thank them. You should also give positive feedback when it's due. If someone's done a good job, there isn't anyone in the workplace who doesn't enjoy getting positive feedback at least a little bit. When it comes to clients, there are ways to be respectful of their working styles. You should always use their branded slide decks so that your output can be used by them whenever needed. You should also always say we and not you when you're talking about anything related to the project and its objectives. You're working as an extended part of their internal team to get stuff done, and so you should be just as invested in positive outcomes as they are. And finally, always be respectful of the client environment you're in when you're at client sites. Dress appropriately, talk about appropriate things, and talk at appropriate volumes. Show your respect by taking cues from your clients about all of these things. Okay, next section is EQ, or emotional intelligence. This section is all about putting yourself in others' shoes to understand what they're experiencing and to act accordingly. It's also about controlling your own emotions so as not to create issues for anyone else. At work, your method of formal communication is email. You will send emails all day, every day to clients and to colleagues. Every email needs to be started and signed off appropriately. If it's to someone that you know well and you speak to regularly, then you're probably okay to launch straight into the reason for the email after some sort of hello. But if it's someone you haven't spoken to in ages, then make reference to that. Say that you hope they're well, or that you hope they had a great break. And whether it's someone you know well or don't know very well, sign off with something that you're comfortable with and keep it consistent. I like signing off with thanks for everyone because it's grateful, friendly, and not too formal. Also, with email, there is a right time to reply. Sometimes it's instant, but not often. Most of the time, it's within a timely manner, so within a day or two. That's a fair amount of time if you've got lots of work on or if you just need a breather to think about your response. More than that, though, and it's plausible that you haven't got the email or you haven't read it, or worse, you're ignoring the sender. You don't want the sender to think any of those things because they might start to worry or they might then have to spend time chasing you. The only exception to this rule is if you're junior and you're emailing someone very senior. That very senior person probably has 100 other competing priorities they have to work through before they can get to your email. It's a fine balance in this situation because if you don't send a reminder to them, then it's likely that they'll just forget, and actually they'd appreciate the reminder. But also, double or triple emailing them about something not very important in the grand scheme of things when they're rushed off their feet is not okay. So you have to make a judgment call about why they haven't responded to you yet and chase or not chase accordingly. Relatedly, judgment calls are required to determine who to ask when you have a question or you need some help. I would say the rule of thumb is always ask the least senior person who's going to know the answer to your question. That is, unless you're already talking to someone senior who can answer it and there's easily time to cover it. But in general, don't go to someone senior just to ask them where the coffee cups are. Their time is much better spent on more important things. Also, when you're asking for help with some sort of issue, then propose some solution options. Don't just present the problem. The more that you've thought ahead about what you need, the easier it is for someone to help you, and so the more likely you are to get somewhere with your ask. Okay, those pointers were all about using EQ to demonstrate awareness of others. Let's now turn to using EQ for self-awareness too. There will doubtless be times at work where you're really worried about something. And if you were in an environment with your best friend or your other half, you'd be very open about all of your feelings. But in the workplace, there is a time, a place, and a way to raise your anxieties. If your anxieties are at a point where you need some help, then of course your HR team is there to support you. But if your anxieties are more fleeting in nature, then it's usually better not to outburst with every feeling to your team for the sake of protecting their own anxieties. If you think it's productive for the team to express what you're feeling, then you should do so in calm, logical language, explaining your reasons and the potential impacts that you want to avoid to your collective work so that you can all collaboratively work through it all. Okay, final section, ownership of ideas. This one is a true test of a high-performing consultant. It's about knowing who knows what and who needs to know what. As a consultant, you will very often find yourself in a position where you're presenting something, usually accompanied by slides. You might just be presenting to one person, say a client or a colleague, and you're walking them through some slides. Or you might be presenting to a lot of people, either in a meeting room or on a call. But either way, if people are listening to what you're saying, then you need to make sure that what you're saying is relevant to those listening. When you prepare what you're going to say, you should consider what your listeners already know so that you can plan how you're going to add to what they know already, rather than just restating their knowledge. However, starting briefly by restating some joint knowledge is usually a good place to start because it means you set off from the same footing and it can make your presentation more successful when you then move on to new territory. You should also consider how much more they really need to know, because giving them lots of information that isn't useful is just a waste of their time. For example, giving senior clients lots of intense detail isn't going to give them what they need. They need summary insight and next steps. So always consider what your listeners need in terms of the amount and the level of information you present. As you progress through your presentation, then make sure that your audience is actually following along. Before you move to the next slide, ask the question, does everything on this slide make sense and does anyone have any questions? And then pause long enough that even someone with just the vaguest uncertainty has time to muster the guts to ask their question. The more you do this, the more confident that you and your audience will be that everyone is following, which makes a monumental difference to how comfortable you all feel. And finally, the words that you choose to speak when you're presenting are important. If your audience doesn't know buzzwords, then don't use them. If your audience is very familiar with buzzwords, then don't spend time explaining them. Be sensitive to how your audience would describe what you're saying if they were presenting, and let that guide your positioning. Ultimately, the more that you really own your ideas, the more that you'll be able to tailor them to make sense and be useful to your audience. It's an art, but I've seen people do it really effectively, and it's a trait that stands them out as very high performers. So there you have it, 4 categories of pointers that got progressively harder as we went. As a junior consultant, if you want to be in the top tier of performers at your level, then make sure that you're doing all of these things. They are fundamental to working efficiently and effectively with your colleagues and clients. Knowing them all in advance is going to give you a handy head start anyway, and you'll be able to track your own progress by how much you notice others not doing these things. And I give you permission to give yourself a pat on the back every time you do notice it. If you're going to ensure that you do these things now and perform better as a result, then let me know by clicking the like button. And if you'd like to see what I post next, then definitely subscribe to my channel. Social media links are below if you'd like updates via those. And if you have any questions or comments, then feel free to use the comments section here and I'll do my best to answer absolutely everything. In the meantime, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a great day and I wish you all the best with your exploring.